in the CIA's clandestine service. He lived undercover for 25 years, retired from covert assignments back in 2006. He still continues to consult with several intelligence community agencies, the Department of Defense, and numerous state and federal law enforcement organizations. In his final assignment, Brandon was a senior staff officer for the director of the CIA, serving as agency spokesperson and the CIA's official liaison to the entertainment industry. Here he is back on Coast to Coast. Chase, how are you?
Hey, good morning, George. How are you?
I'm doing fine. What's your reaction these days when you hear people talk about the CIA, Chase, and they say, oh, this is a covert operation, they're out to do all these things? You were with the CIA for 35 years. You've got a lot of friends there. You're well respected yourself. What is your reaction when you hear things like that?
Well, look, the CIA is an extraordinary organization, both in terms of the mission given to it by the U.S. government to go out and find the kinds of information, knowledge, secrets that are stolen from foreign governments and foreign transnational groups, so that the CIA analyst and everybody else in the organization can put together a composite every morning of what's going on around the world, so that sense of what's happening can be passed to our number one consumer, the president, in the form of the president's daily brief. Information goes to selected people who are able to have dissemination of our intelligence products, and those are the people in the oversight committees and other members of the federal government, certainly the war planners and war fighters at the Department of State, and absolutely elements of the federal law enforcement community, especially those that deal with terrorism and other kinds of criminal activities directed against the United States in the United States. So the mission of the agency itself is comprehensive and of extraordinary importance. The middle name of the organization, for Pete's sake, is intelligence. And you absolutely must have people who possess intelligence at the individual level in order to go out and collect the information, assess the information, process it, and turn it into something that helps the rest of the U.S. governance structure do what it's supposed to do to safeguard U.S. national security interests, American facilities, and the lives of American citizens. So, by definition, people who gravitate toward wanting to take on a job, a career of that magnitude, pretty motivated, pretty impressive, pretty talented people. And just because you would like to do it, it doesn't mean you can come in, apply, and get a job. You have to be able to pass a rigorous background investigation and all manner of other security validation checks before the agency elects to bring you into a pretty specialized line of work. So, prima facie, you're talking about a really remarkable group of people, and it has always been my most extreme sense of pride and privilege to have been part of that great organization. So when I see newspapers or news programs excoriate, vilify the mission of the organization, accusing it of doing all kinds of conspiratorial, Machiavellian things that are directed against somehow Americans and American interests, and when I see feature films and TV programs and other entertainment industry products that would invariably, as they always did, show CIA in one of two forms, either a bunch of bungling Clouseau cops or outright ugly, venal, corrupt traitors and rogue operatives, as they're always called. I've never liked any of that, because having been given the remarkable opportunity to live my life as an agency officer, I knew the heroism, the dedication, the loyalty, the patriotism, the risks that many of our officers, especially in the clandestine service, take, and the tragedy and the pain of losing even one. But we have on our major big granite wall inside the lobby of the original headquarters building, we have a galaxy of stars chiseled in the wall for people that went out, did their work, and paid the ultimate sacrifice, lost their lives. And there is a book on a small pedestal in the center of that wall, and it contains some of the names of all the stars that are up there. The telling tale about the consequence of the work and the organization itself is that most of the names of people who died and whose stars are chiseled in the wall aren't shown in the book. There's just simply a little black star and a black line. They remain anonymous even in death. So it's a remarkable place, and I never liked the fact that we were so universally misunderstood and so poorly represented. And I actually had the chance after my 25 years in the clandestine service to do something to help rectify that when I was given an opportunity to be the first ever overt spokesman for the covert side of the agency.
And that must have been a pretty interesting position. We'll talk a little bit about that. Well, at the time that you came in, Chase, of course, the KGB was doing its thing. The Israeli Mossad, which is still in existence, was out there. How would you compare the CIA in terms of being an intelligence gatherer to those kinds of agencies?
It's difficult to make quantitative comparisons to groups and organizations whose methodologies are secret. And our competitors, former KGB, modern day NVR, the Russians, and Mossad, and the MSS, the Ministry of State Security for China, and all of the other many hundreds, thousands actually, of intelligence services, like us, when they do their work correctly and effectively and they have successes, nobody knows about them by virtue of the fact that they're success. We always fell into the category that was once described as, CIA is an organization that's known by its failures. Well, look, collecting intelligence and then running presidentially directed and approved covert action programs in the propaganda and misdirection arena abroad, and paramilitary activity on the ground in foreign countries where low-intensity conflict, terrorism, insurgency, and all manner of other international criminal activities are taking place. When we do that sort of thing, it is a big risk versus gain equation, and everything we do is weighed against how badly do we have to acquire this information, how rapidly must we move to gain some insight, collect some new pieces of the puzzle, if you will, that we can put on the agency's metaphorical kitchen table every morning and try to figure out what's going on around the world. How hard do we have to push? How many risks do we have to take, including putting our own people's lives and the lives of people who agree to work with us around the world? How much do we put out on the line there to get back what we're trying to acquire? So risk versus gain. Well, the nature of the business is that the risk versus gain means that oftentimes the risk is really pretty high, and there's a failure in our vernacular called flap. Something doesn't go right. It's a complicated world out there. I firmly believe, based on certainly, if nothing else, my 5 years as a full-time Class A general machinist, which is how I worked my way through college, incidentally, undergraduate school at least. When you have complicated machinery making complicated parts and you have complicated structures, by definition, the complexity of the organism will generate its own brand of additional complexity. So we're out there doing massively complex operations, and stuff goes wrong. And when it does, we have that flap, we have that failure, and we get the press for it. And so, absolutely, we are known by our failures. What we don't get credit for, what the American tax-paying public, whose dollars keeps our front door open and our paid. Nobody ever knows about the successes. So when you ask, how do I compare CIA to these other organizations, I would say we all do fundamentally the same sorts of things for the same political reasons, because almost everything having to do with any sort of governance centers absolutely around politics, and politics creates at the 60,000-foot level above the ground on which all the rest of us citizens and people daily plod about doing our business. The 60,000-foot level political equities press down and affect all manner of things, social, cultural, ideological issues. They generate a lot of complexity. And under the ground level that most people walk, if you could get down under there and look, you would see that most of the political trees that grow at ground level aren't just individual growths popping up here and there. If you looked under the ground, you would see that all the roots are connected in a tangled, Machiavellian conspiratorial way, because that's where the clandestine activities take place. That's where the manipulation and the exploitation and the operations are run to gather the information that no other country wants to share with us. We are always concerned. Every country, it mostly is concerned about the business of neighboring countries, other countries scattered all over the world. And in that governance structure are a president, a prime minister, a king, a queen, a dictator, a despot. Somebody sits at the top of that food chain. There are all manner of governing offices and bureaucracies, departments underneath them. There's a military industrial complex. These countries have resources. They have issues at home. They have plans and intentions to do something to or with neighboring countries. They have regional hegemony interests to exert their own influence in their own region. There is an endless list of stuff going on in the country. Sometimes stuff going on in other countries has a bearing on our own U.S. national security interests at home and competes with our own global hegemony tendencies and interests around the world. So CIA wants to find out what the who, what, when, where, why, and how of all that is, so we can report it back to our governing structure. Well, every other country is doing the same thing. So we have operations people all over the world from all the intelligence services, and they're all rooting around trying to get sources and access to pockets of information, proprietary information, none of which any one government wants to have revealed to any other country or the rest of the world. So you get all that conspiratorial stuff going on, and the whole idea is to find people that are willing to also take a risk for some kind of gain to provide information to us.
Well, let me ask you this, and I want to get into the Cryptos Conundrum, which is a great book. It's fiction, but it's created quite a stir, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the CIA, Chase, has always been accused of or tied into these various areas, and I want you to react to that. That they were part of the JFK assassination, that the CIA is running drugs, they're making black ops, covert money, using it for all other things, and that they knew about 9/11. I mean, we keep hearing those things as news people and as American citizens all the time. How does a CIA agent react to that?
Well, look, the agency operates on a highly compartmented, need-to-know basis. Is there anybody inside working for a blue badge-wearing professional staff official of CIA? Is there anybody that knows everything the CIA does? George, frankly, I doubt it. To include the director, I mean, we're the smallest federal agency in the Washington alphabet soup of organizations, but it's still a large enough organization, and it's certainly a complex one, and in spite of its openness, it still is fundamentally, at heart, a secret organization. Things are firewalled, compartments are blocked off, there are projects that a few people know about, several hundred people might know about. You know, there are things that maybe only a handful of people know about. So, having been there as long as I have, and everybody that I know, my colleagues, professional colleagues who've worked there, I would hazard a guess that all of us would say, well, who knows what we don't know? But one thing we do know working there is an orderliness to the place. There is a mission commitment. There are absolutely good people who are nothing if not 100% exemplary patriots, dedicated American citizens, CIA professionals.
Sure. And I would say most of them are
everybody's motivated to do the right thing for the right reason.
I would say most of them are probably that way. Dedicated, hardworking Americans.
Yes.
There's no question. But then there is that possibility then that some of these things we hear, maybe not, but we're not sure. Is that pretty accurate?
It's a world where it's hard to prove, false negatives. It's hard to know what you don't know. We are, as we say we are when we're doing our official missions that are authorized by the White House. We report to the executive branch. I will tell you that if you are a clandestine service officer, you stand on one side of a line that says you are honest, you are accountable, you have integrity, you follow rules and regulations, you are a team player, and yet, by nature of the work we do, which is to go abroad, lie and steal for the U.S. government, we lie about who we are, we have covers so that we don't run the risk of being identified while we're overseas by foreign governments who would like to grab hold of us, or international, transnational criminal types, the terrorists who would literally like to kill us. We have to keep our identities safe. So we lie about who we are, and we steal. We get those pieces of information, those puzzle pieces from around the world that nobody wants to give up willingly. So we have an entirely different doppel shift when we step on the other side of the line and go to work. So that in and of itself is a complex kind of lifestyle and creates its own brand of conundrum. So can there be people that do things they're not supposed to do? Can there be pockets of some kind of broader mean-spiritedness in the agency? I don't know that. I mean, I absolutely don't. But how do you definitively rule it out? How do you definitively prove anything anymore? Life's gotten too complicated.
It is way too complicated. Were you with some of your other CIA friends and associates? Did you ever get together for coffee or at lunch and go, what do you think of this one? I mean, did you guys ever talk about things like, 9/11? Was there a conspiracy, or was it indeed just the terrorists that pulled these buildings down?
No, absolutely. We totally react to news stories and allegations and charges and everything else. And we do compare notes about what we know to the extent we can without telling even a lifelong, closest professional working colleague who in the process has become a lifelong personal friend at literally a brotherhood, a band of brothers level. We still don't talk among ourselves out of the bounds of the compartmentation into which we have exclusive knowledge for things we do. And how much we might like to share it with a colleague, we don't.
Okay, with that, let's talk about, when we come back, the Kryptos Conundrum. It's an incredible story. It's fiction. It has to do with extraterrestrials. And because of that, there's a major story breaking all around the country that included Chase, and we'll get his reaction to it. We'll be back. And our guest, we've got him for 2 hours, Chase Brandon, ex-CIA agent, author of the book, The Kryptos Conundrum. We'll talk about that and some other issues when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast, Chase Brandon with us, author of The Kryptos Conundrum. Chase, when I say, and I call you an ex-CIA agent, is that accurate? I mean, I always thought once you're a CIA agent, you're in. You don't get out.
Yeah, the old adage is, with the Hotel California, you can check out, you just can't leave. There are people that say, you never can leave. No, you absolutely retire. Most of us absolutely come back in one kind of contractor or annuitant form as another, because most people so enjoy what they do, or literally so proud to be part of the organization and committed to the mission, that they keep doing it even long after they've retired and could go on and do other things. They choose to continue to keep their hand in, their foot in, if you will, because they like the work. George, if we could just go back, I know it's your program, but you asked me some specific things about my reaction to charges that the agency would have been involved in 9/11 and the assassination of Kennedy and all the classic things that we conveniently get tagged with by people who like to create good storylines. The notion that CIA would have somehow had any kind of involvement in 9/11 with bringing buildings down, fomenting an act of terrorism in this country is ludicrous beyond articulation. So I completely, reject that, rule that out. I was still in school when Kennedy was assassinated, and believe me, like everybody else, I heard that the agency was behind that. Never in my time in the organization I see anything or have any reason to add anything to any other than the overt press charges and conspiratorially oriented folks who still maintain that to this day. I will tell you this: having the acquaintance of a very distinguished and now quite senior elderly man who is a physician specialized in emergency room medicine his entire life, and is still a physician emeritus at a major medical facility somewhere in the States. He was, as then a much younger emergency room on-call doctor at Baylor Hospital on the day of the shooting. He and another physician were in the emergency room when the two gurneys were rolled in, one with JFK's body on it and the other with Governor Connolly's. And in the triage of the moment, clearly the president was being looked at first. And the one physician was around the front looking down at Kennedy and said, "We got a wound here in the throat." My friend was standing around behind and said, "Don't bother. The president is dead. He has no skull left in the back." And indeed, the Secret Service officer, agent who recently did the book, saying that Jacqueline Kennedy, when she crawled back on the end of the convertible sedan there, was reaching back to pick up her husband's skull cap. So his point, the doctor's point, was this, and it ties into the conspiracy thing about CIA. The doctor's point was, having been always involved in forensics of especially gunshot wounds, he said, no way does a bullet impact the back of the head, pass out through the front, leave a small round hole in front, and leave a gaping wound in the back. It's absolutely the other way around. So he totally has ruled out, and I've never understood why this man was not interviewed and never appeared on any of the post-shooting incident reports. He said no way in the world was President Kennedy shot from behind. And other people have long since come out with the Grutter film and all the other sightings of somebody up on the grassy knoll. So if the question to me is, do I believe there's a conspiracy about the assassination of Kennedy? I say there's a very complex story about how that occurred, who may have been involved, what kind of political equities were driving the decision to carry out something as massive as presidential assassination. Do I think my organization was involved in it? No, I absolutely don't. And I can't tell you specifically why I don't. It's a feeling that it didn't have a role because I've been a part of the place. And that's actually going to tie in later when I know you're going to ask me about the box, and I'm going to tell you about my feelings there,
Sure. All right.
and what I know about my agency.
But when you say, Chase, that you don't think the agency was behind it, and I can agree with that in some issues, but that doesn't negate the possibility that some people within might have had knowledge, might have participated, might have been part of their own thing, whether you know that or not, and I don't either, but I'm just throwing that out.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if nothing else, in the first segment, I established the fact that it is a complex world, compartmented across the board, but especially within an intelligence organization, also in the military. And how do you know what you don't know? You don't. So does anything fall into the realm of possibility? Yes, absolutely yes, or anything can happen. And most of the time, things have happened because there are conspiracies, there are plans and intentions that groups and organizations carry out for all manner of other 60,000-foot and subterranean motivated reasons. And most of us who walk around at ground level aren't aware of any of it.
I have interviewed thousands of people, and my gut tells me that you are an honest person to the day. You say it the way you believe it, and if you can't say it, and we're going to get into this classification in a moment, you won't say it. But I do not believe that you are lying about anything, nor would that even enter your mind. That's my gut about you, Chase.
Well, I appreciate your feeling that way, and I applaud your keen judge of character because
it is all right. So let's talk about, first of all, a little bit about your book, The Kryptos Conundrum, and let me tell you why it has created such an incredible stir around the country. Because we have an ex-CIA agent writing a fictional book, and a darn good one, about extraterrestrials and good old Mother Earth and the history of cataclysmic events. And on the face of it, people will say, hey, this is a novel. It could be a movie. He's having fun doing this. But then on the other hand, people will say, wait a minute, he's an ex-CIA agent. He knows something. Given all that, our dear buddy Lee Spiegel, who I just think the world of, he's a good writer, writes for the Huffington Post, wrote an article several days ago, and let me read the headline. Roswell UFO was not of this earth, and there were E.T. cadavers, ex-CIA agent says.
Yeah.
And so I read into it, and the ex-CIA agent he's writing about is you.
That would be me.
So let's talk a little bit about what you said and what you saw and how this story even came about. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, look, one of the first things to point out, and I'll come back around to this with you. The issue actually is not what was in that box and what I saw. The real issue of consequence, and I want to wind up on it, is what was not in the box. Okay, I'll make that distinction and come back to it. But here's the first thing. I mean, I don't have a copy of what I said in front of me, but I think one of the first things that Lee said was that I looked in the box and said, oh my God, Roswell really did happen, and I think he credited me with saying that it was not a weather balloon, and
Okay, well, let me read his quote to you, Chase, and you tell me if you think this is accurate. Tell me if this is what you said. He says, and he's quoting you, "It was not a damn weather balloon. It was what it was billed when people first reported it. It was a craft that clearly did not come from this planet. It crashed, and I don't doubt for a second that the use of the word remains and cadavers was exactly what people were talking about.
Absolutely. Exactly what people were talking about when they were first interviewed back in July of
47.
It is what the first individual that stumbled across it, the rancher, Mac Brazel, said. I think he contacted this Sheriff Wilcox, who was the first civilian official on the scene. He used the terms remains and cadavers and bodies. And then Major Marcel and other military officers from the Roswell Air Base came and looked and made reports and used the same language. And all the other townspeople, that when word of this spread, literally like a brush fire, other people all came out and saw and compared notes and talked. And so, for the first 3-4 days, whatever it was, when all that was breaking out there, people were all saying the same thing. And I'll bet you, George, if you had met any of them and spoken with any of them, your assessment of them would have been the same as the one you just articulated about me. But they all seemed like regular people who did not have any kind of agenda and were saying what they believed, what they had seen, and recounting the total veracity of what happened at that particular place and time in history. It was interesting, July of 47 was a big deal. Roswell occurred, but it was also passage of the National Security Act, which turned the theretofore War Department into the Defense Department, took the Army Air Corps and broke it out, created the U.S. Air Force out of it, created the National Security Council, and an organization called CIA. All that, came to passage about 3 weeks after the Roswell event. So all these places were brand new. In my estimation, people back in Washington, military, senior people, top brass people, thought about what had been said and verified by the military service, what was appearing in the newspaper and going around like crazy in the civilian sector, especially out in the Mexico area. I think people did exactly what they did. They got on planes and flew out to Mexico and sort of huddled up with everybody and said, you know what, we can't go there with this. We have no idea what's at stake by making these revelations about what I, in my heart and soul, clearly believe was the truth. And so began the process of dealing with containment and information management. And how is that done? Well, it's done with propaganda. It's done with careful constructs. In our modern world, it's called advertising. You want the public to buy a certain kind of product. You package it in a way that they're more apt to lay out their hard-earned dollars for it. And I think there was an effort to hold back on any more revelations until studies were done and assessments taken. My God, what happened here? What does all this mean? And what do we do about it? How do we calculate this into the whole national security complex at a time when the world was not quite into the hysteria of the Cold War that emerged and the threat of global thermonuclear war with the Soviets, but all of that stuff accelerated during the 40s and into the 50s and 60s. Good Lord, I mean, we were doing nothing if not changing at light speed and absolutely heading toward the complexity in which we find ourselves today. It's been a process, a cumulative process over many, many decades. So I already, as I was older, I already had a predisposition wherein I felt like Roswell was what Roswell was originally described as being. It was a site where some kind of craft, not of this planet, not from this world, came down in a smashing heap, and that there were beings, creatures, whatevers on board, and they were seen, they were discovered, and it was all scooped up because that debris field was picked cleaner than a hound's tooth. And I have no idea where all of that went. If it went into crates and went into the government warehouse, it's like the closing scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Sure.
So
the Ark was in some box somewhere, and nobody knew about it.
Nobody knew about it, and I absolutely understand how things that get covered up become further covered up through the attrition of there being no continuing focus on them, and fewer people that had clearances to know, the need to know, as they die off. You really do lose something through the transition of time and the passage of history, and so I think a lot of the ability to ever go back and find forensic evidence that says with 100% certainty that this happened or that this didn't happen. I think it's really hard to do that now, especially with this one particular event.
Well,
so, look, I already believed, and moreover, as I had been traveling around the world for the agency doing my work overseas, I had an opportunity to see the majesty, the beauty, the mystery of the world. And some of the things I saw were places like Machu Picchu, Sacsayhuaman, Teotihuacan, Stonehenge. And George, I have to tell you, as a machinist who did very precision cuts on high tolerance, tight tolerance aircraft parts, I understand cutting with tools, something as hard as a piece of metal, the angularity, the grooving, the boring, the flat surfaces.
The exactness.
And the exactness of it, and the complexity to do something of a constructive nature like craftsmanship. Okay, I've been to these places, and I look at stones. Just in the case of Machu Picchu alone, there are stones that were, number one, quarried as near as they, archaeologists and people can determine, from about 75 miles away from the rock spire upon which Machu Picchu sits. 75 miles away, came up a roaring, non-stop waterfall of a river called the Urubamba. And then that stone, which, incidentally, that one stone, is the size of a living room in a regular house, was lifted 2,000 feet straight up the side of a vertical rock spire and plopped down on top of Machu Picchu. And the cuts of the stones like those around Sacsayhuaman, the fortress above Cusco, multiple sides, 12 sides to some of these stones, all precision fitted with other humongous stones. And, George, you can't slide a piece of print paper between it.
Something happened. And Chase, hold on. We're at the top of the hour. We're going to come back. We're going to talk more. I want you to talk specifically about this so-called box that has created this furor about Roswell. We'll get into that. We'll see what you can and cannot say about it. We'll also take some phone calls. We've got Chase Brandon, ex-CIA agent, for one more hour. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. We're going to take your phone calls this hour with the ex-CIA agent, Chase Brandon. We'll also talk with him more about what he may or may not have seen in this so-called box. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Chase Brandon. Chase, let's talk about this infamous box for a moment here that you stumbled across at the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. It was in a certain area. What were you doing in there? And this box apparently was stamped with the word Roswell on it.
Yes. Okay. I have to give some context to this, or I can't answer the question, period. But I am delighted to answer the question if you give me a chance to put it into context.
Of course.
The organization collects information, and in the older days, back in the 40s, 50s, all through the 60s, stuff came in and from pouches and boxed in, and it went into the clandestine service part of CIA, and things were filed in boxes and desk drawers. And when I first came in and worked at headquarters, nobody really owned a desk. You know, you sat at wherever the convenient place to sit was, and when you would open it to try to find pencils and paper clips and scissors, you had to rummage through all kinds of stuff that had been stored there from the 10, 12, 25 other people that had sat there before you, opening pouches from overseas and figuring out where to stick something to get it off the top of their desk. I will tell you, I found all kinds of amazing things in those desk drawers and those boxes and those old barrister bookcases for which you would put law books in with the pull-down glass door in front. The place was full of stuff. Nobody had any idea what it all was. Well, when the agency entered the modern era and cubicles showed up and wooden furniture came in and the original manual typewriters were replaced with electric typewriters, and the mimeograph machines went away and became Xerox machines, and the pace of complexity and sophistication began to accelerate. Stuff got put in cardboard boxes and shoved out in the hall because they had to clean up the place and make it look, more business-like, because that was the new government decorum. Well, where'd all the odds and ends go that had been squirreled away in desk drawers and filing cabinets and safes? A lot of it showed up out in the corridors in the form of museums, the OSS Museum, the Cold War Museum, the Science and Technology Museum, and the rest of it was sorted through, probably much of it simply thrown away because nobody knew what it was. Certain things went into convenient, old-fashioned, heavy-gauge cardboard boxes, the black and white and gray colored boxes with a kind of a hinge lid, and two little circular discs of heavy cardboard, and you put the lid down and you ran a little heavy-gauge twine through it, figure-8 style, and that's how you locked it. There's a little metal frame on the front, and you slid half of a 3x5 card, or maybe a 3x5 card in there, and then you either scribbled something on the outside of the box with some of the contents, or you just put a name on it. And those boxes all wound up going to a place in the library called the Historical Intelligence Collection, and you can go online to the CI's website, and it'll tell you all about the HIC and how it was built and put together. And it was part of the open, several level CIA research library, loaded with what? All kinds of international newspapers, magazines, books, anything that the agency accumulated to help the Jack Ryan Analytical Corps do its job of working the who, what, when, where, why, how puzzle pieces every day. The Historical Intelligence Collection section was not a place where just anybody could walk in and thumb through books and underline things with highlighter pens, because in addition to some wonderful old statues and some interesting pieces of art and other material things with actual monetary value that had shown up from connections with people in foreign governments overseas, there were incredible books in there that went back to the early 1600s, leather-bound books, and the stuff was priceless. So you had to have some degree of reason to go in, and oftentimes the little old lady with the blue hair and the tennis shoes that ran the front door there at her little desk, she'd go in with you. I went in there because as the film industry, entertainment industry liaison, I had documentary people come in. We filmed a number of documentaries with film crews having access to all kinds of places in the CIA as part of our openness program. And I was looking for a new place to do a stand-up interview, and I had been in the historical collection section a couple of other times, and I was in there this day, unescorted, looking around, and behind a partial wall was a big case, a big metal rack with all these boxes. I don't remember how many. I mean, there was a lot of them, 2, 3, 4 dozen. Hell, I don't remember exactly. But it was an interesting background because of the mottled black and white gray color of the boxes. And so I stood there and I was looking, and my God, the little handwritten notes for the boxes had a lot of interesting names on them. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. I wonder what's in there. And I was just scanning around, and I saw one that said Roswell. And as I said, I have always been a believer. I know in my heart and soul what I feel, what I believe, and I thought, wow, you kidding me? The box says Roswell. I lifted it down, opened it up, and looked inside. And I won't say what's inside, but I told you at the top of the program that was not in that box, and those boxes aren't even there anymore. They've now been moved on because everything in the library has gone digital. There are far fewer books and many, many more computer screens where the current world of cyber-oriented Jack Ryans sit down and do their research. So I have no idea where those boxes are. Probably like a lot of other things, you know,
Sure.
CIA, Homeland Security, the FBI, the Defense Department, they all take filing cabinets and lock up safe drawers and file cabinets with spin combination locks on them. They move those out when they're continually updating and spending money to update when perhaps it's not required, but they got to spend that money, use it or lose it. So what happens to all the extra government furniture and file safes and cabinets and all that stuff goes to the Government Services Administration, gets auctioned off all the time. We have cases where people go buy a batch of safes or file cabinets from GSA only to get them back to their schools or office buildings, whatever, open the drawers and go, I don't think this is supposed to be in here. And what's in there are file folders full of secret documents. Happens all the time. It's just the nature of a complex world. So I have no idea where all these boxes went. All I know is the last time I was back in headquarters a number of years ago, I went through the library and all that historical intelligence collection.
But you look inside of it. You look inside the box and you see something, right?
Okay. All right. So what was in there at the time tells me, and this is the most important part, it tells me it's a validation of what I already believe in. What's in there generally, some photography, some material items, and other written material. So that's important to me because it validates as I look at it. I am blessed to have received a wonderful academic education. I am blessed to have worked for an organization that had me travel and see the world and watch history unfold. So I think I have a degree of intelligence that qualifies me to be in the Central Intelligence Agency. I understand the concept oftentimes that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So I look in the box and I see the things that are in there, and for me it validates what I already believe. That's important to me. What's important to say about the box from the standpoint of CIA as an organization who owns the material, wherever it happens to be today, what relatively little of it there was in there, it is not a prima facie indictment that CIA is sitting on top of and covering up some conspiracy about aliens. Because what was not in the box, George, and people listening, there were no, a la Vietnam, when certain military servicemen collected, Viet Cong ears. There are no alien ears in
body
box, no eyeballs floating in jars of formaldehyde. There were no little space goggles or uniform parts. That is not what was in there. And so, if the question to me again is, do I think the agency conspiratorially was involved in the Kennedy assassination? No, I absolutely don't think so. 9/11, good Lord, no, absolutely not. All the other things that we get slanderously charged with, no, I don't believe that either. Did we take possession of anything forensically after the 1947 crash? George, I don't know that. But I do know that what I saw is not and should never be construed to mean I think, I believe, anybody else should think or believe that things in that box constitute the smoking gun about CIA's role in covering up anything. I have no idea what any other government agency has. The Air Force was involved. Wright-Patterson Air Force was involved involved in
Oh, sure.
picking up
It was
material? What happened to all that stuff? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. I only know what I do know, and that is, for me, what I saw, and I described those things in general terms. They validated what I already believed. And I hope that puts that in a context for you.
Well, it is, and the reason why you're not telling us is because it's classified, or you just can't do it.
Well, first of all, the box was not classified. None of those boxes had anything on them that said that they were classified.
Okay.
So I think they were the sort of, flotsam and jetsam of stuff that wound up in desks, and how it got there, who sent it in, who unwrapped something or opened an envelope or a box and said, "Oh, what the hell do I do with this? Here, I got to find a place for it." They shoved it somewhere here and there, and it, along with all the other odds and ends that wound up in the other boxes, eventually came to rest in the Historical Intelligence Collection. So the reason I won't say what's in there was because it's not my property. Whatever it is belongs to the agency. The agency is an intelligence organization. The whole place is a gigantic classified box in and of itself. So I signed a security agreement. I am bound by my own sense of integrity and loyalty to my agency. I am not going to divulge something that I'm not authorized to divulge. Saying what I said is probably
too much.
a stretch on that concept, but it validated for me what I already believed, and I believe that the idea that something crashed out there is just one more of the many mysteries about how we have been influenced way back, hundreds, thousands of years, millennium, from some kind of beings who came from someplace else for some reason. And I think what they brought here to us were gifts of math and science and construction. And, today we're finding in the last few years ruins now in Bolivia and Peru still, now underwater, far deeper underwater than constructions of stone megalith should be accountable for, unless the seas were considerably shallower back then, which seems to be the case. But when you go in with high-resolution cameras and you look at the trenches and the arches and the planed surfaces of stones, now elaborately carved stones that are showing up in these ruins in Bolivia and Peru, you can actually see the tool marks of things like an end mill or a vertical cutter, like I used on the Cincinnati milling machines and Bridgeport vertical milling machines that I worked as a machinist on. Tool marks. Come on. This is like 3,000-4,000 years ago. Give me a break. Something strange has been happening on planet Earth involving something not from planet Earth for a very, very long time. And
well, let me ask you this, Chase. I don't want to interrupt you, but if what you saw in that box validated things you had believed in, and we don't have to be rocket scientists to figure out what that might have been to make you convinced that it showed what you believed in. Why don't they simply take this box and say, look, this happened in 1947. It was a long time ago. At that time, we didn't know how to handle this, but now you're mature enough, you understand things. Here it is, folks. Here are the contents of this box, or here's this thing from Wright-Patterson, or here's this alien in a jar, for all we know. Why don't they do that anymore?
Because people make political decisions driven by that 60,000-foot level that have other equities involved. We say things and divulge things for certain reasons when it suits certain political equities and vested interests of political leadership, and we don't say other things on other occasions when it doesn't. The whole business of, and one of the questions you didn't ask and other people have asked me, what do I think about the revelation, deliberate, of seriously classified information having to do with our ability to safeguard the nation right now, based on the sources and methods and the identities of intelligence officers and our strategies and tactics for dealing with really crucial issues like terrorists and their capabilities to attack us. What happens when we give out information like that that lets the very enemy we are trying to disrupt, dismantle, or vanquish, when we give them precisely what they need to change their tactics and come at us from a new angle for which we're probably now not prepared? Why do we give up things like that? Why do we make revelations about how those incredible SEAL operatives go in and take down somebody as heinous and venal as an Osama bin Laden? Why do we make revelations about...
Well, but I think a difference between a terrorist who is out to hurt us and an episode that happened back 65 years ago that can't hurt us unless there's something going on they're not telling us about. There are major differences there. I mean, I agree with you. We should never reveal classified information that safeguards this nation and the people in this country. But if there are extraterrestrials and this government knows about it, I think they have an obligation to tell us.
Oh, okay, all right, but see, you cut into the middle of my logical presentation, and while yours was equally logical, they're both similar and at cross purposes. I was saying that decisions are made to do things because of political equities, and often it's personal political aggrandizement. It makes certain leadership, look more potent and powerful, perhaps at key times in an ongoing political process, and so it serves interests even as it cripples our ability. I find that unconscionable, and frankly, something should be done about that too. But the same.
Hold on, Chase. I got to cut in again. We got to hit this break. I'll let you finish that statement up when we come back.